And for me, one tiny, inconspicuous, subconscious phrase was blocking me from utilizing my ability to empathize. Alright, so for this video, I kind of want to piggyback off of what I talked about in my last video. And just a refresher, the purpose of that video was to demonstrate the similarities in the mentality between the early pandemic haircut protesters and myself. Now, obviously, there were huge differences between my actions and theirs, but the point was to show that these actions stemmed from a similar mindset. And basically, I concluded that video by saying that even though I wholeheartedly disagree with their actions, I can understand why they took them because at times I also exhibit that same mentality. It just leads me to very different actions. But in this video, I wanted to talk about that phrase, I can understand, because I feel like I hear the opposite sentiment being expressed more often than not whenever people talk about other groups of people that they disagree with. And I just think that ultimately, that sentiment is inherently counterproductive. The statement, I can't understand, is, first of all, in my opinion, a fallacy. I talked about this in my video about sympathy, empathy, and relatability, but I think that everybody has the capacity to understand everybody. And I think that is the true definition of empathy, the ability to understand the feelings of another person. Now, empathizing doesn't always mean that you will share those feelings. And empathizing with someone doesn't inherently mean that you will agree with that person's perspective. All it means is that you will understand it. And so according to this definition, I don't believe that empathy is an ability gifted to some and not to others. I believe it's a skill. And like all skills, there may be those who have more of an affinity for it, but with practice and diligence, I think this is an attainable skill for all. And so I believe that the phrase, I can't understand, is simply a refusal to engage in the process of empathy. Because with enough effort, you will be able to understand. You will be able to empathize. You may not like or agree with whatever it is you're empathizing with, but you will understand it better. And if it's something that you don't like and eventually seek to change, then understanding it is the first and most crucial step in that process. And that's why when discussing opposing viewpoints or ideologies, like the anti-lockdown haircut protesters, I think it's counterproductive to use phrases like, I can't understand how they can be so selfish, or I can't understand why getting a haircut is so important to them. Alright, so let's take a step back because I want to explain why I think this phrase is so important and why I wanted to talk about this in the first place. Now, as I just mentioned, I think the most important step in changing something that you don't like is understanding it on a deeper level. And that understanding is facilitated by engaging in empathy. And so to block that process from occurring by saying, I can't understand, is inherently counterproductive to changing the things that we don't like about the world. But there's another reason I wanted to talk about this in a video. And in order to explain that reason, I need to tell a quick story. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to some family members about how everything is just becoming so polarized and if there's anything that we can do in our own little ways to help. And as we were discussing, it became clearer and clearer that there really isn't that much that we can actively do. I mean, we're also preoccupied with our own survival. Rightly so. That's not a condemnation. That's just how things are. I mean, between work, kids, friends, obligations, and just the unexpected curveballs that life throws at you, there's just not much that the average person can do to combat this polarization. I mean, it would be literally insane to expect someone to come off of their 12-hour shift and go into town and find someone that they disagree with and try to have an amicable discussion around their disagreements. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I already tried to do this in an online setting. And let's just say that I am rarely successful. And even though this man, Daryl Davis, is one of my personal heroes for going to KKK rallies as a black man and having discussions with real certified racists, and no, not the people that Twitter calls racist for ignorantly saying the N-word one time when they were in middle school. I'm talking full-fledged, black people are inferior to white people and should go back to Africa type racists. But anyway, as I was saying, this man, Daryl Davis, goes to KKK rallies as a black man, talks to these racists and converts them just by having a conversation with them. And so even though I wholeheartedly agree with and endorse this man's methodology, it is simply unfair and unrealistic to expect that of anybody else. And so given these realities, it would seem that the only thing that we can really do is watch passively as the world slowly falls apart around us while we desperately try to keep our own individual worlds from doing the same. But I don't think you have to go out there and be Daryl Davis in order to prevent that from happening. I think that by trying to be more conscious of our own thought processes, we can begin to identify the various subconscious elements that contribute to this polarization and eventually learn to avoid them within ourselves. And hopefully this will generate a ripple effect outward and change how entire groups and communities address this polarization. And for me, one thing I realized about myself and the conversations that I was having was that whenever I talked about people that I vehemently disagreed with, I would shut off any opportunity for empathy by uttering phrases that began with, "I can't understand." And there are other phrases that have a similar effect, like, "I can't believe someone would do this," or "How could anybody do this?" or "Why would anybody even consider that?" etc. All of these subconscious reactionary phrases have a similar effect of shutting off the possibility for empathy. And I think becoming conscious of them and trying to move past the reactionary instinct will allow us to think deeper about whatever it is we're reacting to and eventually understand it. And that will ultimately change how we think about and discuss these opposing beliefs and viewpoints, which will hopefully have an outward effect on the people that we are having these discussions with, so that hopefully when one of these people eventually interacts with a person who holds this belief that we disagree with, their approach to the conversation will be much more empathetic and understanding, which science seems to indicate is a potentially more conducive way of changing people's minds. This article from Psychology Today, which is one of the few free online sources that seems to pass the bias/fake news check. But anyway, this article discusses the efficacy of logic versus empathy when it comes to changing people's minds. The empathetic method is referred to as motivational interviewing and is defined as being partly based on psychotherapy with the use of empathy and support, while also being directed at a specific goal. The article goes on to say that throwing a logical argument at people is an adversarial process designed to show that they are wrong. In contrast, motivational interviewing, aka the empathetic method, poses behavior change as a collaborative process. One of the major determinants of the success of psychotherapy is the establishment of an alliance between a client and a therapist. Arguing with people is likely to make them oppositional, whereas empathic interviewing encourages an alliance and increased appreciation of opposing views rather than sharp rejection. Use of empathy rather than cold logic gets at the emotions and motivations that are behind people's beliefs and practices. Brains lack firewalls between cognition and emotion, and much psychological and neurological evidence supports the view that thinking intermixes thoughts and feelings. Motivational interviewing respects such mixing, while pure logic dismisses it as irrational. Changing minds is as much about emotional change as it is about belief revision. Now, I have to be transparent and show that the article also says that this method is not guaranteed to change people's minds, but its success with many problematic behaviors suggests that it is worth trying as an antidote to misinformation. So no, this is not some foolproof method for changing the minds of people that we disagree with. But this empathetic approach is endorsed by people whose job it is to understand exactly how our minds work. And so at the very least, I think it's worth consideration. And we can also definitively say that our current method of trying to publicly shame people who we disagree with hasn't really been successful. Is it more cathartic? Absolutely. Is it actually effective? Apparently not. So based on all of this, I think the empathetic approach is the appropriate one. And for me, one tiny, inconspicuous, subconscious phrase was blocking me from utilizing my ability to empathize. I can't understand. And so that's why I wanted to make this video. Again, there are so many different subconscious phrases or thought processes that we say or engage in that have a similar effect of blocking empathy. And I think what I really wanted to do with this video was to encourage people to find whatever that is for them. And I also just need to add that I am not this paragon of empathy. I fail to live by this principle every single day. I fall short of this empathetic ideal almost every time I read another news article with people doing things that I disagree with. But that doesn't mean that it isn't the right thing to do. It just means that I have to do better. But in any case, I think that's going to be it for this one. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you indulging me. I hope all of this made sense, but as always, if it didn't, please feel free to let me know so that I can either address it directly or make a follow-up video clarifying what I'm trying to say. I'm still pretty insecure about my ability to deliver my point, and there have just been too many times where I think I'm making perfect sense, but I've actually just been spewing nonsense. So the feedback really helps. But with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.